Hello, welcome back. And today we're moving on to something really exciting. We're going to start doing some dressmaking. I've been dressmaking for more years than I care to mention, but I thought lots and lots of people love watching costumers, sewing videos, and I get asked questions all the time about how to make stuff. So I'm going to start with a simple pattern and you can follow along. It's one that's still available. If that sounds like something that you would enjoy, carry on watching. So to start with, on this pattern, I started making this skirt before I decided to film it. And this is actually the first video that I have mostly filmed myself. So apologies for some of the exposure on it. So I'd already started doing this and I discovered when I was going to put it together that I actually hadn't got enough fabric because I bought the fabric before I got the pattern. Or I didn't check the pattern. Probably I didn't check the pattern. So I had to piece one of the tiers. So it's a tiered skirt made up of 2 panels for the top tier, 3 panels for the middle tier and 5 panels for the bottom tier. And the only really important measurement when choosing the size on the pattern is to make sure that the waist size fits around your hip size. So for me that meant going across 2 dress sizes, but it really doesn't matter, it's a tiered skirt at the end of the day. But as long as you can get it off or on, either way. So I ended up piecing 1 panel for the middle tier. And it really doesn't show. I spent quite a while trying to make sure that the pattern matched a bit, and you can't tell when it's finished. There's a lot of effort. So I checked through the instructions, and given that I'm quite experienced at dressmaking, I found the instructions just so hard to follow. There are some good things. Always put your notches on, which I didn't, because the notches will indicate which way is up and which bits are supposed to match up. Probably most important on the waistband and the first tier. And so you need to piece together all of your cut out panels. It's very obvious you can't really mix them up because they're all slightly bigger than the last tier. So stitch those all together. Make sure you've got them all the right way up by matching your notches. And then you need to stitch your gathering stitches. So you do two lines of stitching on the largest stitch you can get. The first one is actually in these instructions is in the seam allowance, so it's 5/8 of an inch, and then the second one is 1/4 of an inch in from that, and you can see the 2 lines there. I don't actually like that. Later on in this you'll see me showing the stitch line, and obviously if you're stitching on the seam allowance in places you will see it. So I would prefer to either stitch it outside the seam allowance or just slightly inside the seam allowance, and normally I would stitch between the 2 gathering lines, but it doesn't tell you to do that, so I was trying to be good and follow the instructions. So checking the instructions on where to start, I realised that I'd already gone off-pieced. They wanted you to make a waistband casement, and I don't like that because it leaves too many raw edges on the inside. You'll see me finishing off the waistband later on. And the main thing on this skirt is there is lots and lots and lots and lots of gathering. The next instruction on the pattern I would never recommend to my worst enemy. It literally says something along the lines of stitch your gathering stitches and break stitches at each seam. What they actually mean is that you need to snip through on each seam so you can draw out the top threads to gather it up. But what it means is if you don't catch them quick enough, it comes ungathered and you end up with flat bits, and there's a couple of bits in this where you can see that happen. If you want to have a go at this, I suggest that at each seam you start and you stop. So start stitching, leave a tail, stitch all the way to the next seam, stop, pull a tail, start again, leave a tail, and so on and so forth. It would have made this so much quicker and so much easier to do, rather than breaking it apart, fiddling around trying to pull out millimeters of thread. And especially if you've got mobility issues or anything like that with your hands like I have, forget it. And this is the first tier being fitted to the waistband. So the very little gathering. It's really just sort of gathering it down to fit on the waistband. The waistband's only got 2 seams anyway on the sides. So it's quite easy, and I would suggest that you do it this way if you decide to use this pattern, because you can sort of ease yourself into the gathering process and you sort of get the feel of what to do. Once you've gathered it and pinned it in place, go back and stitch on the seam allowance line. And then when you've put both lines of stitching in, trim it down a little bit. I think I trimmed it down about 1/4 of an inch, and then overcast it, or if you've got a serge it, although I'm lethal with a serger, I'm quite likely to just cut off through the hem, so I just use a zigzag stitch on my sewing machine, and that will hold everything in place. Weirdly, this fabric doesn't fray at all, but where it's a 4-way stretch jersey, so that means it stretches from the top and bottom and from the side to the other side, it has a tendency to move even when you've put those 2 extra lines of stay stitching in. And I did find that with especially the last tier with the 5 panels in. And here you can see a little line of that stitching that I was talking about, and this is what it looks like when it's finished. And then next you need to match up the notches with the bottom of the first tier and the top of the second tier. And I didn't cut notches on mine. I had some, but just not all of them. So I use an interesting method called dividing it up into equal pieces. And I mark the back with a red and a green pin. And then I marked each quarter just initially, and then each 1/8 with red pins, and then I know that's a complete section, and then I used any other pins for pinning it all together. But it means if it's going a bit wrong when you're trying to ease round gathers, you know where your sections are if you've still got those red pins in place. And it also means if you're using the sort of red and green pin system, that you can match up the back to the back. And the main thing I found was just offsetting the seams, so because you don't want all the seams to match up, and anyway they wouldn't, maybe one of them would. So here I am on one of the much larger tiers showing you the red and green pins, so I know that that's the back, and then I'm going to find the other ones that match, that's also the back, and then I can pin those together. And this bit just took forever, because you have to go around matching all your red pins up and then easing all of the gathers from 5 panels to 3 is a lot of gathers, and that's what the last one is. Once you get into the swing of it, it's not too bad, so just ease the gathers through. So when you're ready, here's one of those flat bits I was talking about where it's come unstitched. It means when I try and place that gather, there's nothing to gather because the stitching's come out. So you ease the gathers and you make the bottom tier fit the middle tier, and then when you're happy with it across each section, you pin it all into place and then move on to the next section. See, there's the flat bit. So annoying. You sort of ruffle it a bit, but if you did the stitching method I suggested, that wouldn't happen. And when you're gathering, if you just gently ease the threads through and stroke the gathers across, you can actually stroke gathers past pinning as well. You'd have to try it to see what I mean, but just take your time and be patient with it. It's quite forgiving, this skirt anyway, and especially as I used a knitted jersey, so... And then when you're happy with your gathering placement and your pinning, take it back to the machine and slowly stitch over the gathers in place like you did with the waistband and the first tier. And then if you need to move the gathers, you can stroke it with a pin, and you'll see me sort of flicking the gathers across. And that's just because as you're stitching through and the weight of the fabric on the other side, like the weight of the fabric on my lap, is pulling stuff around. So it's just to make it a little bit more even. But as I said before, it's a very, very forgiving pattern. And then when you've stitched all the way around once, you need to stitch all the way around again, and then trim off the excess fabric and either serge it or zigzag it in place. And you'll find, if it's a heavy fabric like mine is, that they still move a little bit, even with all that stitching. So now we're moving on to the waistband. Completely ignore the instructions in your pattern. I've marked it with 2 red pins. I'm literally going to stitch across the seam there as a sort of a stop stitch type thing, because I'm going to cut that bit open, you'll see in a little while. Then press down the seam allowance, fold that over the other seam allowance and pin it in place on the right side, and then top stitch, and it will hide all of the unsightliness, because I don't like raw edges around my waist, so that's why I did it this way, and it actually makes for a much neater waistband. And then I also top stitched 1/4 of an inch away from the top of the waistband as well, just to make more of a waistbandy shape. In the pattern it tells you to then stitch a line down the middle, so you have 2 bits of elastic. You do need the 2 bits of elastic, and I'll explain in a minute. So open up between those 2 stitch lines. This is ready for threading the elastic in. If you have 1 bit of elastic on top of the other in a waistband, unless you have a long waist, which I do not, it will always fold over. It doesn't matter how big a waistband you make, how sturdy the elastic, it's just going to fold over, and I don't want a folding over waistband. But we do need 2 bits of elastic for this skirt because it's really heavy. Unless you are making it out of a cotton voile, it's going to weigh a ton. It is just so heavy. So I put in 2 pieces of elastic, but 1 on top of the other, and that's what you can see me threading in here. Then when you've threaded it all the way through, pull out the underneath layer of elastic, and you're going to stitch the bands together separately. They're never going to be stitched together, so it's literally 1 band surrounded by another band, and then if you stitch them with an overlap of about 2 inches, you'll find that the even where it's stitched will still stretch. And then you can also, if you could get it through your machine, it was getting pretty cramped by the time I did this, if you stitch a couple of diagonal lines as well, so sort of like a box all the way around and then a diagonal line across, and that will hold all your elastic in place. Then when you finish that, I just did like a little ladder stitch just to close up the slit where I threaded the elastic in, and you can't see it when it's done, so it's all beautifully finished. And that leaves us with just the hem. Again, on the pattern, I'm not short. I assume this pattern is made for somebody of about 5'5" to 5'6". I am 5'8". And I have a really high waist as well. I tried on this skirt and it was dragging on the floor. I didn't put in any extra. I didn't adjust the length. I literally just wanted to make it as it was, sort of box fresh out of the envelope. And it was way too long. In the instructions, it tells you to turn 5/8 of an inch, iron it, and then turn it again, another 5/8 of an inch, and then stitch that on the machine. Well, I would have been falling over it, so I decided to do it a different way, of course. And I turned up the 5/8 of an inch, ironed it, pinned it, more to hold the ironing in place. And then from the edge, I measured 4 inches because I knew I wanted to turn it up by at least 2 inches. So if you measure 4 inches and draw a little dotted line, you can take your beautifully ironed edge and just fold it up to that line. Little hint I got from Angela Clayton. Thank you, Angela. And then you know that your hem is the same all the way around, and it really doesn't take that long. And then again, because I folded it up quite a bit more than is suggested in the pattern, there is a very, very slight amount of shaping on the bottom tier, so it's slightly curved. And I decided that I wanted to use I've forgotten what it's called. It's like a couture stitch that they use for stretchy fabrics. It works brilliantly for hemming stretchy fabrics because you can just catch it in the top bit of the fabric. You can barely see it. It stretches across the hem, so even if you catch it and the hem stretches, the stitching will stretch with it. So there you can see it stretching with that sort of herringbony stitching. If anyone knows what it's called, why don't you drop me a comment? I'm going to go and look it up anyway, but it'd be nice to know. So you just keep stitching in the same direction. So you put your needle in and then sort of stitch back on yourself, come backwards almost. And I did do about 2/3 of the skirt before I would even bother filming this bit because I wanted it to look really neat. It's so clever. I love this stitch. You can barely see it on the outside. It's just such a nice finish. And that's the finished skirt. I really hope this video inspires you to have a go at dressmaking. It's so much fun and it's so easy as long as you pick things that are achievable for your skill level. You'll learn really, really fast, but don't set yourself up to fail. I'd really love to share more hints and tips and experience, and I'd love to know what you're all up to and that kind of thing. So, Simplicity, easy to sew, pattern 1110, and it's got size in US sizes, extra, extra small to extra, extra large. Would I recommend this pattern? Kind of yes and no. If you've never done any dressmaking and you want to start somewhere, this is a really good pattern to start on. It gives you a really good overview on how to cut out fabric, how to do different things. You'll learn how to fit in elasticated waist, how to do gathering, how to do the hem, all of those things. And although I've been going on all the way through, oh, in the pattern it said this and I did that, it's a really good place to start, and it's great to learn somewhere. Also, it does give you some nice little ideas if you've never done dressmaking and you literally have just got as far as buying fabric. You've got some great ideas of combining fabrics. There's a little high-low hem, there's a shorter view, all of those things. So if you're a beginner dressmaker, is it easy to sew? Yes, definitely. If you can dressmake already, or if you've made a couple of things, quite comfortable with your sewing machine, you don't need this pattern. And I'm going to make another video because I've got this gorgeous fabric here, which is another jersey. So it's stretchy one way, I can't remember which, might even be a two-way stretch. So I'm going to make another one of these tiered skirts. I'm not going to use this pattern. I'm going to do it all on measurements and we'll see how that goes. But that won't be for a few months, because I figure watching one video on a tiered skirt is probably enough for a little while. And I would love to know, if you do try out this pattern, I'd love to know how you get on and what you think. And can I just say, completely not connected to this video, thank you so much to all of my lovely subscribers. I cannot believe how many people have subscribed since the beginning of this year. We're up to over 400 subscribers, and that is amazing. And it's really, really, it means so much to me and my son, because we would like to get to the stage where we can monetize our videos, and I'm sure if you're a regular watcher of YouTube, you know that we need to get to 1,000 subscribers and 4,000 hours of view time. If you'd like to help us on our way, that would be awesome. Thank you so much. See you again soon. Bye.